Dear learners, I welcome you back to another session of Research Methodology for Tourism and Hospitality Management course. In the last module, we have seen the sampling strategies used by qualitative researchers. And while discussing today's topic, you will have a better understanding of the sampling procedures or strategies used in quantitative researchers. I am sure that you must have gone through these topics in your theoretical papers, or if you attended any workshops, these terms must have been repeatedly used. If you know the topics, it will make the process easy, and if you are going to hear it first time, don't worry, these topics are very simple. If you do practical research, you have to address some questions, and while learning this sampling process, you can easily sail through your research. Let us start. What we are going to discuss today is the sampling types and sampling process. This is highly useful for quantitative researchers. In the previous lecture, I used three terms. One is population, second one is sample, and the third one is sampling frame. Hope you remember these terms. Once again I repeat, the population is the respondents who are in your study. Sample means the number of respondents you choose from the population. Sampling framework means the list that you prepare from which you will be choosing the samples. In broad, we have two types of sampling. First, probability sampling. Second, non-probability sampling. The probability means here the opportunity for a respondent to attend the survey. Non-probability means, based upon the judgment of the researcher, he can include a respondent. And in probability, every respondent has equal opportunities to become a respondent in the study. So here, under probability sampling, every unit in the population has an equal chance, and in non-probability it is not there. Hence, we cannot assure the outcome will be generalizable or not. Sampling here involves random selection. In non-probability it is non-random. We cannot do the calculation of sampling error under non-probability sampling. While we do statistical analysis, how we conduct the sampling, that matters a lot. Probability sampling carries lot of value when you talk about generalizing a study. But for a researcher is concerned, there are lot of difficulties, practical issues. So we go ahead with non-probability sampling at many times. Let us go into the detail. The first one, which we hear very common term, is simple random sampling. Under probability sampling, imagine we have a population of 1000 and we need to choose 200 out of them. How to choose this 200? Do you think a lottery technique would be working so that every unit in this 1000 get an equal chance? Or any other solution can support us? A recommendable practice here is we can generate random numbers. Now ChatGPT, if you ask ChatGPT, instantly it generates random numbers. If you use MS Excel, it can also generate random numbers. So you can give a command, generate, first you create IDs for this 1000 unit. Okay, for example, in a municipal area, there are 1000 people living. So each house has an ID. You keep the ID in one column, and in the second column, the random numbers will be generated. Sort the random numbers. When you take the first 200 against whose house or which unit we have to choose, that is the best way. In MS Excel or SPSS or other statistical softwares, you can easily generate random numbers. So, every unit get equal opportunity. This is one of the very simple form of identifying sample size, and at the same time gives probability for every unit to become part of that study or becoming a respondent. The second type of sampling under probability sampling is systematic sampling. In systematic sampling, we first form the sampling frame and we again create random numbers, and we choose the first item randomly, and the next item is chosen by calculating a fraction. For example, 5th item, 10th item or 15th item, like that. So, at the end you will find out the required number of samples can be collected systematically. So, at the first phase, remember, we have a sampling frame and imagine there are 1000 units in it, but we cannot take all these 1000. We want to use systematic sampling process. So, we generate random numbers and we decide a criteria, and based upon that criteria we take every 10th item or 20th item, so that you can have the required sample size at the end. So, this is what is called systematic sampling. Next one is called stratified sampling. Stratified sampling is applied when we have a large area and we have to divide the area into strata. Strata means a small group, and this group should be non-overlapping, remember. So, then after dividing the area into strata, we can choose the subject or respondents from each strata. So, what example I have given here is, for example, we have to collect 400 samples from an area, and we can divide that into north, east, south and west, and we can give a proportion. Each area we can choose 100. So, we can divide first into stratas, and from stratas we can randomly pick the samples. Proportional stratified sampling or non-proportional stratified sampling. These two types of sampling which deals with a process where the geographical area is wide. I have given here an example. So, in this example we find tourist arrivals to different regions is hypothetically given, that is north, east, west and south. So, now when you want to identify the sample size, you have to divide the proportionate number required from each area. That means the performance, the northern region where you have 4000 tourists, and it falls approximately 40% of the total tourist arrivals. So, 40% is equal to 160, and next one is from the west it is 30% where it goes to 120, and east it is 20%, 80, and from the south it is 10%, that is 40. So, proportionately you are identifying the sample size. In case if you are not proportionately doing, the other option is non-proportional stratified sampling, which I presented you in the previous slide. That means you blindly assign 100 to each region. So, where the proportionate aspect is not there, where the researcher is assigning the numbers without looking at the proportionate performance. The next type of sampling here is cluster sampling. Cluster sampling means when we conduct a study and the population is spread over a huge area, we can identify that into identical regions called clusters. So, each cluster has some homogenic features, and from each cluster we can identify the required sample units. I have given here an example. Ministry of Tourism conducts several studies. And imagine that one of the study is on the roadside vendors who are dealing with the souvenir items, and the location of the study is western coast. So, we have 4 states here we can study: Maharashtra, Goa, Karnataka and Kerala. So, in these 4 states we have to select the beaches or beachfront area where roadside vendors they sell souvenir items. So, now one of the interesting aspect here is how you identify which location can be selected. It is based upon the clustering, means which state has identical size of tourist visit. You find Goa more in terms of beach tourism, or you find number of beaches from Maharashtra, Karnataka and Kerala can be identified. So, you can choose then randomly selected clusters where the survey can be administered. So, this is called cluster sampling. Multi-stage sampling is normally applied when we find exit poll results, even it appears in news or television channels. One of the mechanism to do sampling, probability sampling, if the geographical area is too vast, that is multi-stage sampling. So, it includes 3 different stages. What are the stages? First is you have a sampling frame, and that sampling frame is large in shape, which have small sample size as discrete groups. And again, number 2, you have to identify the small discrete groups and from that to subgroups. And in the third stage, from these subgroups, you have to identify the unit where you can conduct the study. Let us go with a diagrammatic expression here. The first stage, see, take the example as India. We have different states and union territories. So, when we find election results, exit poll results happen, these channel media experts, or you can find the experts of who predict the result, they conduct researches. So, they identify the samples. Here we find out of 8, we have identified around 3, that is number 3, 6 and 7 as the unit which we can observe in the first stage. And in the second stage, we again identified the subgroups. In each subgroup, we have multiple clusters or areas. So, we have identified randomly, and in the third stage, we will go with a specific individual that location, and from there we will choose the sample. Once again, let me show you the first image. This is the first image, the wider area, the geographical area from where we have to collect the sample, and the second is it is related to the chosen one. We identify some states, and from that states we will go to some specific districts. So, finally, the sample is chosen from a specific location where you have identified, that would give you the required results. Now, let us see non-probability sampling. Non-probability sampling where the probability of selection is not determined. The unit of selection, this is based upon the convenience of the researcher, not random. And there is a possibility of sampling biasness. When the researcher is identifying a respondent, the researcher's own wisdom is the determining factor. And it is comparatively easy, that is the reason many researchers prefer non-probability sampling. Convenience sampling, according to the researcher's convenience, access, reach, identifying the respondent, convenience sampling is used. So, what are the disadvantages? Here the researcher's biasness may come into play. So, what we extract from the result, the generalization may impact. That impact comes from if the respondent the respondents' information is exaggerated or what we can call biased, that will impact the result of the study. The second one is called quota sampling. Quota sampling, we can segment the population into mutually exclusive groups. Then either you can use proportionate or non-proportionate mechanism to conduct the study. So again remember here the non-random process is selected. Non-random here means like the probability, there is no probability of giving equal chance to every unit. So quota, the researcher assigns quotas, that means a proportion. Expert sampling. In some cases we find the researcher use expert sampling to collect the data. That means the individual's knowledge on an area that can give a better insight. So here again an issue comes, generalization. Another type of non-probability sampling is snowball sampling. In the previous modules we discussed on snowball sampling, but once again let me explain in detail. Snowball sampling refers to when we have a small group of people who can give us information, and then to reach out to a larger group their references are used. That means I ask my friends to recommend their friends to complete the questionnaire. So in the sequence I started with one of my friend and that friend is adding into a common friend group, like that it goes into different stages. So snowball sampling, when you start you may have a limited number of people, and when it reaches into mass you may have absolutely no knowledge of who is filling your questionnaire. Now let me conclude what we discussed today. These terms which we started with are very common, and in my study days it was one of my favorite area because it was easy to study in research methodology, the types of sampling, probability and non-probability. And you might heard about lottery methods. In many cases we identify an individual using lottery system. So these tricks were easy for me to remember, like non-probability sampling and probability sampling strategies. Under probability sampling we have seen simple random sampling, systematic sampling, cluster sampling, stratified sampling and multi-stage sampling, each of which has different purposes. Simple random sampling is useful when your population is small, but if your study area is wide, you want to reach out to a huge area and reach out to different people, respondents in different areas, it is advisable to have multi-stage sampling. The advantage of probability sampling is you can calculate the sampling error, and it reduces the bias. And in non-probability sampling the advantage is that you can reach out to the unit, the respondent quickly. You may get the information. You may not have to spend much amount or much time. The disadvantage of non-probability sampling is you cannot calculate the sampling error, and there is a possibility of biasness. The question of generalization, that become an issue in terms of non-probability sampling. I hope by now you are clear with these terms. When you plan data collection for your research, first identify who is your population, and next think whether probability sampling or non-probability sampling, what can give you the best answer. And if you can use probability sampling, that will help you also to conduct statistical analysis in a better way. You can conduct statistical analysis using advanced tools. With this we conclude here. I hope you had a good learning session today. Thank you.